Depending on who you are going to ask, this is either the last great Black Sabbath albums from a string of back-to-back successful ones that helped shape the metal community, or just the beginning of the end. I mean, writing 6 albums in 7 years is insane to think about these days, unless you are King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who have probably shit out another album while you have been watching this review. Either way you look at it, Sabotage is an amazing album by the band, and we will be talking about the recording sessions because there are stories to tell about those times, notable songs, my thoughts on the album, the reviews from music critics along with my score, and finally, this album's legacy. So before I go insane, let's get into this. If Volume 4 was seen as the party album powered by excessive amounts of perfume and white gold, then Sabotage is the onset of the come down. The album was produced during an incredibly tumultuous period in the band's history, which saw Black Sabbath engaging in a legal battle with their former manager, Patrick Meehan, which took its namesake for this album. This caused a drain on their finances, which required the band to pay for the record out of their own pocket, and lawyers to be constantly present during recording sessions. The reason for Patrick's dismissal boiled down to money, as Black Sabbath realised they should be getting paid much more than they were earning after 5 years of non-stop touring. The band made this decision after their performance in front of 300,000 fans for the California Jam, or Cal Jam Festival, which was headed by ELO as well as Deep Purple themselves. Pretty much right after that gig, the band found out that all their assets, from stuff to cars and homes, were under their manager's name.
That's a peddling.
This whole issue stems back to when Black Sabbath originally were managed by Jim Simpson around about the time of their debut album, and were severely underpaid for their shows, which resulted in Don Arden making a move to become their manager back in 1970. Now, Don was infamous for his negotiating techniques, in which he usually hired a bunch of well-muscled friends to assist in helping people see things his way. A well-known story surrounding one of his acts, Steve Marriott of Small Faces fame, comes when Keith Moon and Jimmy Page tried to make him the singer of their band, pre-Led Zeppelin days of course, and Don wrote a letter to Jimmy Page asking if he wanted to play in a band with broken fingers. Unbeknownst to Don, 2 of his employees, Wilf Pine and Patrick Meehan, had gone behind his back to sign on Black Sabbath and brought them into the international stage, with success following. Unfortunately, Patrick is one of those managers who would hide the band's true income. For example, when Black Sabbath performed at that California Jam, they were paid $250,000 for their appearance, but each member only received $1,000 for the night. And as mentioned before, Patrick also owned all their assets, such as cars, houses, but even worse, he also owned the rights to their music, hence the lawsuit. In an interesting turn of events, the band would sign over to Don Arden in 1976 after the legal dispute with Patrick was over and done for. Don Arden would also become Ozzy's father-in-law a few years later when he married his daughter and future manager, Sharon Osbourne. What a twist. Now, this wasn't the last time that a manager influenced Black Sabbath's writing either, as Don Arden and Sharon Osbourne were the subject matter for the future Black Sabbath song Devil and Daughter from the Headless Cross album, which I've already covered on an episode of Retro Reviews. An interesting anecdote from the sessions has to do with the song Superstar, which involved using the English chamber choir performing on this piece. Upon seeing the choir, Ozzy reportedly thought he was in the wrong studio and promptly left, illustrating the album's unexpected and eclectic elements. Regardless, the band managed to write and record the entire album in the space of 2 months. Wrap your heads around that, people. You can't record stuff in 2 months these days. This album has an abundance of classic anthemic Black Sabbath tunes that would be included in future performances, and there's no better way to kick things off than with this next piece right here. Hole in the Sky is one of my favourite songs by Black Sabbath. It's just this thunderous opening riff that is just so heavy, like heavier than most Black Sabbath riffs, and that's saying something. The song is unusual for its time signature as well, as it's played in a 12/8 time signature frame and was considered ahead of its time for doing so. The lyrics are rather open to interpretation as well, as it could be symbolic for someone in a jail cell, ascending to the afterlife, or possibly being an entity witnessing the stars during their lifetimes, or even the apocalypse itself. It's up to you, the listener, to decide. This tune would also foreshadow the rest of the album in its complexity within, while still sounding so simplistic at the same time. This is what makes Black Sabbath so unique in their approach. When you think of the members of Black Sabbath, your mind often races to Tony Iommi, Ozzy Osbourne, or Geezer Butler. And unfortunately, Bill Ward often gets overlooked, which is a real shame, because he is a criminally underrated drummer, and this tune right here, this tune showcases his ability to the masses. Bill Ward's drumming style is flexed out and larger than Arnie in his prime here, as he showcases his power behind the drum kit and insane drum fills, keeping a tight rhythm section for Tony to play out his guitar part. He also manages to show refrain towards the closing part of the song as it starts to go into a quiet acoustic section. This song also shows an interesting side of Black Sabbath with their abilities to transition between certain parts of the music. In particular, those hard-hitting riffs that you hear until it hits that smooth acoustic piece that wouldn't be out of place to hear on a Grateful Dead album. The band just managed to do this so effortlessly. Kirk Hammett has also stated this song as a defining game changer for heavy metal, describing it as a touchstone for both the new wave of British heavy metal and thrash metal itself. Once you hear that riff, you'll always hear it again and again, and clearly the fans thought so too, as it became a popular song to play live to the extent that when Ozzy did a cameo as the manager for the band Helmet in the Jerky Boys movie, Helmet started playing this song during that one scene in the movie.
Get the fuck out of my way!
Yeah, this one. This is the only single to be released off the album, and to be honest, it was 1975, so their options were very limited. I mean, they couldn't just put out a near 10-minute long megalomaniac for the radio stations to play, and I think if they played Hole in the Sky on the radio waves, people's speakers would spontaneously combust. Ironically, Hole in the Sky was the B-side for this single, with B standing for better. Now, to be perfectly candid, I despise this track and nearly always skip it on a playthrough. This song just screams to me of record execs whispering in their ears and pushing the band to make a radio-friendly song so the album becomes more marketable. Fuck that. On top of this, it has this over-the-top use of keyboard sections that feels very out of place for the album and just feels like a sign for what would follow over the next few records. And even Ozzy has made his opinions on this song public, stating his strong dislike for this song as well as Superstar, which were distractions on what would have otherwise been a perfect album. And while I disagree with him about Superstars, which feels like an amazing transition piece with an epic build-up, I do agree with him on this part. Now, it's a common misconception that the prefix of radio in the song's title alludes to the purpose of this song becoming a radio single. That is not true, and Bill Ward cleared the air on this matter, mentioning that it was Cockney slang, which rhymed for mental, with the full term supposed to have been radio rental. Anyway, this song is very out of place on an otherwise stellar album, and unfortunately serves to besmirch its image. I usually found this album to be an odd one in the mix, as it was the first to have an album cover with the entire band on the front, which I always thought was a massive misstep by them. I mean, Volume 4 is iconic with its picture of Ozzy in a duotone orange and black cover and a huge font on the front. But this artwork is extremely dated, especially with the fashion sense of each band member, who looks like they were tossed into a drag queen's wardrobe from hell before selecting some outfit. I really dislike this cover, is what I am saying, especially coming out after Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and its dark, nightmare-fueled artwork. Simply put, Black Sabbath had the greatest unbroken string of amazing albums by any band to ever exist, with Sabotage being a near-perfect record that would be their 6th successful outing. If I was a vinyl purist, and I'm not because YouTube doesn't pay me that well, then I would have their first 6 albums on vinyl, and they would glow brighter than 1,000 suns if a UV light was shone within a 50 meter radius of them. Look, I have special memories of discovering Black Sabbath for the first time, which goes back to one of the bands they highly influenced, and that was of course Metallica. Thanks to their album Garage Inc., which I listened to with Doz on high rotation at high school, we knew that we had our homework cut out in regards to checking out these bands that were the influences to Metallica. On Garage Inc. itself, Metallica would perform a medley of Sabbath songs on the track Sabracadabra, and as such, my friend Doz pre-ordered their first 6 albums. After he listened to them, he lent them to me, and he said, "You have to hear this band. They are heavier than Metallica." And you know what? He was right. They just sounded evil, foreboding, giving off feels like a scene from a horror movie before the main character goes into the haunted house that shoots lightning whenever you cast your eyes upon it. These albums have that distinct 70s era studio production on here that just sounds better. Don't get me wrong, the current style is fine too, but the level of production that is found on these early records in regards to what Black Sabbath were making is better suited for this era. It's as if their sound was too much to contain in the recording studio and the music blemished the master tapes, but instead of ruining the finished product, it added to its character like an unknown fifth member for the band. And it's also one of the reasons why I find it hard to make a list of best metal albums for each year, because Black Sabbath would just dominate the beginning of that list. I could only imagine how wild it would have been to be back in the 70s and hearing this music for the first time, compared to, say, other contemporary acts for the day. The closest comparison I might be able to draw is when Slipknot made it into the charts for their first two albums, which sent shockwaves throughout the public zeitgeist, but even this parallel couldn't fully fathom what an impact Sabbath had in the day. What I can tell you is that it left a lasting legacy on my musical taste, as I was hooked to Black Sabbath's music the second I played their albums. And well, that's been over 2 decades now. I even consider myself lucky because I managed to catch Black Sabbath with Ozzy Osbourne during their End of the World tour about a decade ago, and I can say that despite his health being in decline, Ozzy gave it his all and absolutely blew me away, along with the rest of the band, of course. I mean, Geezer is a boss behind his bass, and Iommi is as iconic as always. My biggest gripe had to be that, of course, Billboard was not part of this tour due to reasons. Most likely Sharon Osbourne and money, but hey, whatever. Still, it was great to see them live, even though they didn't perform any tracks off this record. What? Would it have killed you to at least do Hole in the Sky? You did a song from Technical Ecstasy, but not this one? Who am I kidding? They pretty much performed the entire record of Paranoid in full and did Snowblind. So, you know what? I consider that an epic win. The album saw mostly favourable reviews, however, it was the first release by the band not to achieve a platinum status in the US. The scores for this album currently sit as follows, with Metacritic giving a score of 92 out of 100, AllMusic giving a score of 4.5 out of 5, Encyclopedia of Popular Music giving a score of 3 out of 5, The Great Rock Discography giving a score of 7 out of 10, Rolling Stone giving a score of favourable, The Rolling Stone Album Guide giving a score of 4 out of 5, Sputnik Music giving a score of 4.7 out of 5, Music Hound Rock giving a score of 3 out of 5, and Spin Alternative Record giving them a score of 9 out of 10. Meanwhile, over at RachelMusic.com, the album sits at a score of 3.8 from over 15,000 ratings. As for me, hell, I'm going to give this album a score of 13.5 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe, Megalomania, and The Writ. Oh man, do I even need to say it again? Black Sabbath single-handedly invented heavy metal, and of course are the cornerstone for this genre. They have 6 classic-era albums, and each of those albums almost serve as blueprints for subgenres that would be influenced by Black Sabbath in the future, such as stoner metal, thrash metal, or new wave of British heavy metal. Black Sabbath's Sabotage, however, shows the technical skills by the band on full display here, as the band just managed to produce an incredible album while simultaneously juggling with their own issues behind the scenes. Sabotage was another album that would become a huge influence on future metal acts, in particular due to this album's progressive nature and shifting dynamics on songs with changing tempos or even shifting sounds. Bands like Metallica, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and even Soundgarden were big fans of this release, with Lars Ulrich himself stating that this is his favourite album by Black Sabbath, and Soundgarden acknowledged that their guitar tone was shaped around Tony Iommi's off this record. It's no secret really that many musicians can attest to Black Sabbath and their legacy, and I think it can be fully understood when, of course, you take a look at the lineup for the final Black Sabbath show, which took part recently and featured one of the most insane lineups you can ever see, as many of the bands I just mentioned were amongst those who paid homage to the goats of heavy metal. But others we should mention, of course, include Pantera, Guns N' Roses, Hellstorm, Anthrax, Alice in Chains, Gojira, Lamb of God, Rival Sons, and Tool. Now, while progressive metal may be synonymous to acts such as Tool or Dream Theater, these subgenres' foundations can be traced back to this record right here. Unfortunately, this record would also be the last of the great albums by the band, as their follow-ups Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die failed to live up to expectations, and Ozzy would soon be fired from the band. While a massive blow, it was really for the best of both worlds, worlds, because as such we got Ozzy's solo material and Black Sabbath would manage to reinvent themselves with Dio, which would create the longest standing argument amongst the fan base about who was the better singer. Regardless, for 6 years, Black Sabbath proved why they were the GOATs, and Sabotage really is a testament to the band, and one that should be part of any vinyl enthusiast record collections. Anyway, for the sake of the greatest metal band to have ever lived and the Prince of Darkness himself, make sure to like this video and tell me your experience with this album. Anyway, make sure to tell me in the comment section below what about your thoughts on this record, and as always, you stay spicy out there. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.